optimistic, where he says, well, we managed to eliminate a certain class of nuclear weapons. And that was not the response that I was expecting to get from him. What was...
No, he actually did achieve it, and it points to our time. Why don't we create a climate where we can address the most dangerous things? Why don't we abandon, in my opinion, the counterproductive demonization of Russia? Why don't we speak to the enemy? If Russia is considered an enemy, speak to them. And I welcome that the current president of the United States just 3 days ago had a long phone conversation with Putin. At least that they are talking, I think, is of some advantage. That America is talking to North Korea has at least diffused an imminent, dangerous situation. Whether it's going to take us anywhere or not, we'll see. But my hope is that both North Korea and the United States looked, like Gorbachev and Reagan, looked beyond the horizon. And it can be, in my opinion, it can be diffused. And in case of North Korea, the real big issue behind all of this is not only the denuclearization of the entire peninsula, but reunification, like my own country, reunified, and it's in the air somehow, and it will be very, very difficult and very painful, but it should happen.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up by asking you, you mentioned in the film that reunification of Germany was very important to you personally. What was going on in your life around the time when the Berlin Wall fell? Do you remember that day, what you were doing that day and how you felt?
No, I don't. For me it was important because politics had basically abandoned the idea of reunification. But sorry. When the Berlin Wall fell, I was shooting a feature film in southern Patagonia, the southern tip of South America, on the most difficult mountain on this planet, Cerro Torre. And we had very vague shortwave radio communication sometimes. 5 days after the wall fell, an assistant came and he said to me, Werner, you know what I heard on Uruguayan shortwave? The Berlin Wall fell 5 days ago. And we were in the middle of shooting and I stopped shooting. I said, this is the day we have to stop shooting. The Berlin Wall fell, we will celebrate. And the kind of shock that went through me of delight, I still feel this as a moment of very great elation inside of me. I could not continue shooting.
So did you think it was never going to happen then? Is that why you felt this sense of shock?
Well, I walked around my own country following all the simulations and up and down of the border. And I knew it would happen, but that it would happen so soon, I didn't predict correctly. I predicted the constellation under which and the conditions under which it would be reunified. I predicted it fairly precise, but I misjudged entirely that it would come that quickly.
There is another scene in the film where they're discussing the cutting of the barbed wire, the cutting of the Iron Curtain, and you talk about on Austrian TV, they were discussing leaving out beer for slugs. That was the lead story that day. And then, oh, by the way, the Iron Curtain fell. That reminded me of a situation that we find ourselves here in the US now, where we will have, big events, anything that's happening with the investigation of Trump into Russia. Basically, Fox News will just completely ignore these events. And I wonder if you find yourself in a situation where you want to know about, you know, the world, but you feel that the media, like your country's media, isn't giving you the full picture. How does one go about finding better information?
That's a complex question, and I do believe that you have a great alternative, and that's the internet. However, the internet is infested by mainstream,
Yes.
and infested by fake news, and infested by whatever craze, conspiracy theories, you just name it. You have to be prudent and really good in navigating the internet. How to navigate the media here in the United States, it's the same problem we have in Europe or in Germany. It's the same thing. The problem is today is not so much what the real facts are. The real issue is who owns the narrative.
Yes.
And whatever contradicts the narrative is immediately ostracized. And speaking about your situation with your president, I do not believe, seeing it from outside, I do not believe that Russia elected him. It was America who elected him. You have to be sober enough and face it. Of course, there was propaganda, and America does propaganda, and America infiltrates other networks. And nobody in America ever worried much about Secret Service listening into the private phone conversations of Angela Merkel, Dilma Rousseff, Mitterrand, the Italian president, and 12 other presidents. Nobody made a big fuss about it. Just imagine Russia would listen in to the White House conversation of Donald Trump. It would be a casus belli, it would be a declaration of war almost. So these things are proliferating, and we know that the internet has certain dangers, and we have to navigate against what we see and hear on the internet, and we have to navigate against what you get hammered in, day out, night in, night out, through certain media here. And they just trust in your own instincts, find your own landscape of information. And my advice is for America, look into Al Jazeera, for example, which is real. It sounds absurd, it sounds grotesque, but Al Jazeera has real news. You have to distract, of course, whatever they report on Israel. You have to access other media outlets, and I don't need to praise Al Jazeera, but when I look at Al Jazeera, I have the feeling, my God, this is real news. They report in detail about Eastern Congo. They report in detail about what's going on in, let's say, the Philippines. And it's wild what's going on there, and we should know.
Yeah. And I think here in the US, for example, watching this film was interesting for me because when I was a student in the late 90s, they basically taught us that Reagan ended the Cold War single-handedly. And so you have this issue of what kind of history you're taught, and you need to...
History is always a figment of partisanship. And I'm not speaking just Ronald Reagan and the United States history. I'm speaking of Roman and Greek antiquity, and I'm speaking of late medieval construct of history that you find in French historiography of the time.
Yeah. So on that same note, what about this era in history? There are clearly some parallels between this era in history and our current era in history. What lessons do you think that we could take from the end of the Soviet era now?
Well, I think it's a very encouraging film, because the most inconceivable two characters connected, Reagan and Gorbachev. And I do remember how in the United States and parts of Europe, Reagan was just belittled as being a mediocre Hollywood actor who is now trying to act president. I do remember it, I still have it in my head. Not so, I kept telling my friends, no, look at the man, look at his speeches and impromptu speeches. He was a great communicator and he was a real politician coming out of decades-long work in labor unions, in this case, Screen Actors Guild. He was governor of the state of California. Take him seriously, no matter how he looks like and no matter how well informed he is or not, it does not matter. He was an important president.
And I just have one more question for you, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. At the end of the film, you ask Gorbachev a very straightforward, rather poetic question, and I'm going to pose it to you as well. What should be on your gravestone?
I have no idea. I should have a sailor's grave somewhere out in the ocean. And by the way, I shouldn't die anyway.
So, questions from the audience. What we'd like you all to do